Hello everyone, Pulse here to bring you yet another episode of Delving Deep, ESO. Now in today's episode we're going to continue our discussion about the skill lines that will be available to us in Elder Scrolls Online, and we finally arrived at the racial skill lines. Now before I talk about them, I have to give a shout out to a Mr. Xalberrious for pointing me in the right direction as to where I can find out about these racial skill lines, because I hadn't heard too much about them, so big thanks to him for pointing that out to me. Now in this episode in particular, we're going to talk about the Aldmerri Dominion. I've decided to kind of space these out, do 3 separate videos, one for each alliance, that way it's not too jumbled up. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the High Elves, the Wood Elves, and the Khajiit. Now, before we discuss this stuff, as always, let me reiterate to everyone that this isn't confirmed information from Zenimax, but instead it's a collective of information that just comes from a numerous number of beta testers, and the evidence is really piling up at this point, so this is what we should expect. The skills are obviously going to change prior to, at release, and far beyond, but this really looks to be what we're going to be getting. Now, beyond this point, I also want to make it clear that any plain numbers, I will try my best to keep them off the table, but any numbers that are mentioned beyond percentages really need to be taken with a whole ton of salt, because we don't know the context of the numbers and we don't really know how the scaling will work. So a number like 5, for example, may be small to us, but in the reality that is Elder Scrolls Online, it could turn out to be a huge number, for example. We just don't know. Now, as I said, percentages, on the other hand, will be mentioned throughout. They give us a much better understanding of how the skills will work as compared to a plain number like 5 would, so those will be mentioned throughout so we can understand how they might work, how potent they could be, and where they'll be useful when we're fighting, so on and so forth. Now, let's get done with the rambling, shall we? I know you guys don't care about all that garbage. Let's get into the actual skills, shall we? We're going to start with the High Elves, and their ultimate ability is called Highborn. This is going to increase magic recovery by about 100% for about 15 seconds. Now this is a pretty bland ultimate in terms of what it does. It just seems like a souped up passive, as it were. But the thing is, it's also pretty powerful. We're actually not given an ultimate cost, which is unlike the other 2 that are in the Aldmerri Dominion. So I'm not sure if that's been tweaked or there was a mess up in some of the descriptions as to where this information has kind of come from and gathered. But it seems to be you're just going to pop this on yourself and essentially get double your magica recovery. That's pretty damn cool, and it could be potent in certain builds. I'm not really that excited about it, but I could definitely see somebody utilizing this in a really potent where they could pretty much spam spells, give themselves near infinite magica for about 15 seconds. I'm not sure if that's going to be possible, but I could see somebody at least trying that. And then that leaves the passives. The first one being Destruction Talent. This is going to increase EXP gain with Destruction Staff skill line by 15%. So the Altmer or the High Elves are going to earn their Destruction Staff skills a good bit faster than anyone else. That's pretty cool. It's not something I was expecting on the racial skill lines, to be completely honest, but I guess it makes sense in the context of the Elder Scrolls universe. Now the next one is called Spell Charge. This is going to increase magica recovery while in combat by about 7%. That's, like I said, kind of on the same lines as the ultimate. It's just base magica regen for a percentage amounts, which is still strong. 7% is not a low number by any means. Then we have Gift of Magnus. This is going to increase maximum magica gain by 10%. Oh no, not gain, rather. Your full maximum magica bar. It's going to increase that by 10%. That could be useful. Not as powerful as recovery. Sometimes it differs depending on game, but usually it comes down to recovery is better in the end game. And then finally we have Elemental Talent, which is really the only interesting one here, to be honest. And this is going to increase damage done by cold, fire, or shock effects by about 3%. So when you look over these, I have to say it's what we should have expected, to be honest. It's the all-powerful Altmer, the users of magic, and that's what we get here. Tons of bonuses to spells, and that makes sense considering what the High Elves are doing in the universe and how they're just supposed to be so far and beyond the strongest magic users in Tamriel. It's kind of bland, as I mentioned, but they do seem potent, I have to say. Bland does not mean useless. It definitely doesn't mean that. It just means kind of boring. But you know what? Boring can be powerful. As I said, the ultimate isn't really that inviting to me personally, but it could be used in a lot of different ways. It's not really that inviting to me, mainly because Spell Charge and Gift of Magnus already boost your available magicka, so I'm not really sure how useful it's going to be if you're in Aldmerri, because you already have that magicka availability. But as I said, it can't be taken that it's a weak spell, because it could be used potentially in a way that lets you spam spells for maybe lower damage per spell, but with that much magicka available, you could throw them out like a machine gun mage or something. I do like Elemental Talent. It's obviously going to be the most useful with the Destruction Staff, right? Because that's the weapon that is guaranteed to have the elements on it. It's the only one at this point, since we haven't heard about runes making it into the game for a long while now, so it's safe to assume that the Destruction Staff is going to be the main player when it comes to this little passive here, but it could also be used in certain classes as well. The easiest one to relate it to is Dragon Knight with the Ardent Flame skills. That seems like an obvious go-to as well, so I wouldn't be too surprised to see some High Elf Dragon Knights making the most of the Elemental Talent passive on that. So then let's get on to the next one, shall we? That goes on to the Wood Elves, or the Bosmer. And their ultimate right off the way is a lot more interesting than pretty much anything that the Highborn, or the High Elves rather, brought to the table, with their ultimate being Summon Bear. This is going to be a medium-sized ultimate in terms of cost, and it's going to summon a bear companion to attack nearby enemies for about 15 seconds. That could be pretty cool. It's fairly interesting compared to the other ultimates we've seen. Let's get into the passives then, shall we, though, before we talk about the whole skill line as a jumbled up package, as it were. The first one is Archer Expertise. This is going to increase EXP gain with your bow skill lines, very similar to the Destruction Staff one from the High Elf, and this seems to be kind of a trend. All the sort of races in the game are going to have their own separate preferred weapon or armor or what have you, so they're going to get the EXP gain from those certain weapons. Then we have Vigor. This is going to increase stamina recovery while in combat by about 7%. Again, same as Spell Charge on the High Elves. Then we have Resist Affliction. This is going to increase poison and disease resistance by a flat 50. Now, as I said, the plain numbers have to be taken with a whole ton of salt, but even still, it's just not a very interesting sort of passive. I've never been a fan of skills which gave you just a flat resistance buff. I think even WoW got rid of them entirely. I could be wrong on that, but it seems like something that was removed because they were just so bland and boring and didn't really serve much purpose. But you know, it could turn out to be useful in Elder Scrolls Online, so can't really judge it too hard until we see where it fits. And then finally we have Stealthy. This is going to increase your stealth radius by 3 meters or so. That could be fairly useful. It seems like stealth is going to be one of those popular playstyles just because people from the prior test games really like the ability to sneak around and stabby or shoot from far away. So I'm sure this passive will be intriguing and interesting for some people to pull them away from maybe another choice and take them down the road of a Wood Elf. Now, as I said, it's a good bit more interesting than High Elf when you look at the whole skill line together. The ultimate skill in particular is pretty interesting to me when you compare it to the other skills available in the game thus far. As far as I can remember, there's not been anything even close to a summon sort of ultimate ability. Maybe in the Dark Summoning Tree. That's right, there's a Storm Atronach and something, but that's a little bit different. This seems to be, it's going to be a much more aggressive thing because it sits for 15 seconds and runarounds and just causes some chaos, so we'll have to see how useful it is, considering AI is not always something that we can consider reliable in the MMO space. In fact, usually it's the opposite of that, but we'll have to see. It's still a pretty cool skill if you ask me. It could be something that draws people to this typical hunter archetype that's from previous MMOs and fantasy settings where you have the hunter or the bowman with their pet of sorts, so maybe having that bear companion beside you. Maybe it's only a 15-second intervals, but I guess people would still find that enjoyment of having their companion beside them and kicking ass on the battlefield. Now, as for the passives available, they really give you that sense that the Bosmer or the Wood Elves are indeed the most naturally skilled archers in Tamriel. The extra stamina means more arrows pouring down on your targets. The stealthy thing there at the end is pretty neat because it could appeal to the dagger-wielding assassin type characters or the stealth bowman, as I mentioned. And as I said, it's kind of popular. That's the thing in prior test games. It seems being the stealth assassin is by far the most popular as far as I know. Now, as I said, the the Resist Affliction, I am not a massive fan of this. It fits the lore, so I can't really get mad at them for trying to put this in here. But it's not interesting, it's not intriguing, it's not inviting. There's nothing about it that makes me go, wow, Resist Affliction, that's gonna be so awesome. It's not. And I actually hope that they remove this kind of stuff. I hope it's not too prevalent throughout the game. It's not something, unless they've deliberately made some encounters where like poison and disease resist armor is usually required, and maybe being a Bosmer would have an advantage in those types of encounters. I'm not really seeing the point of this skill, to be completely honest. But you know what, guys? That's it for the Wood Elves. Let's get into the last race for the Aldmerri Dominion, which is the Khajiit, which is one of the most popular, I think. But what do the kitty cats bring to the table? Well, to start, I have to say currently there appears to be some weird mix-ups going on with the passives, or maybe the current implementation is filler, mainly because they share two passives with the Wood Elves, namely Vigor and Stealthy. And it looks to be that they're either, as I said, filler or potentially in the middle of a rework for the Khajiit passives. But what we do have available is still pretty interesting. So we'll start with the ultimate, which is Eye of Fear. This is going to have a nice range on it, actually, and it's going to fear the target and cause it to take 5% additional damage from all attackers for about 5 seconds or so. This is pretty interesting. We don't see too much fear in the game, if I am remembering correctly. So fear seems to be one of the more potent crowd controls, and the 5% additional damage, even though it's only for about 5 seconds or so, that window is small, the potential is still pretty high for some burst damage. So then what are the passives that we do know about currently? They have Medium Armor Expertise, which is going to increase XP gain with medium armor, as you would expect, by about 15%. And then Carnage. This is going to increase critical strike rating for melee attacks by a flat 35, which is, again, the numbers are not really relevant until we know where they sit in the whole scale of the game. But more importantly, it's going to cause the melee critical hits to do 10% extra damage, which is huge, absolutely huge. But I'll get into that in just a second. So, as I mentioned, the Vigor and Stealthy from the Bosmer are currently listed there, so we've only got these two passives to go off. But let's talk about what we have here. We've got Eye of Fear, which is pretty interesting because there's not too many fears in the game. The 5% or the 5-second duration is pretty short, but 5% damage bonus is potentially quite potent if you have great timing and great coordination. I can see this being really useful in PvP, for example. If you have that tanky kind of target that's really just pissing you off, you and your buddy pop your Eye of Fear and your bursty kind of cooldown sort of stuff, even though I know there's no cooldowns in the game, but your bursty skills, as it were, and just really wreck him for those 5 seconds. And 5 seconds in a MMO setting is pretty hefty, especially in the PvP scenario, so I'm sure that will get some pretty nice usage in PvP for sure. Then we have the 15% bonus on the medium skills, which is, again, it just seems to be across the board. Every race is going to have their bonus thing. I'm not sure how I feel about it being on armor. It seems a little bit silly. I would have expected maybe like a dual wielding bonus, but it seems currently it's medium armor is the best one for the kitty cats, as it were. And then we have Carnage, which is really strong. The base number is not really important. It really is one of those things where it'll probably be useful in a minuscule amount in the very beginning when you're leveling up, but once you hit the high levels and your armor becomes more potent and stronger, it becomes irrelevant. But the thing is that's really strong here is that 10% bonus on crit damage when you get a melee critical hit. It's absolutely monstrous, to be completely honest. It's one of those really high percentages that will scale to ludicrous places if left unchecked. Mainly because as gear gets stronger, your critical chance gets way high, and you could make it to, for example, WoW, right? You could get it to where you could run your buffs in a right way and get near 100% crit chance once you got into crazy high gear levels. And then a 10% bonus to your damage on all those crits, that adds up to a lot. So we'll see how this is tweaked going forward. It would not surprise me in the slightest if it just sticks that way until like the first sort of high-end gear becomes available, and then as they see Khajiits are just really out damaging anyone else that's playing a similar class to them or a similar role to them, mainly in the damage front. I feel like it's probably going to get scaled back to like a couple percent, like maybe 3 or even 1%. 1% was huge back in WoW for anyone that's played a Worgen. Everyone that played during Cataclysm with the Worgen knows that that 1% added up to being quite a chunk of damage in the end game. So we'll see how that percentage gets scaled down, as it were. Now, guys, overall, I think the Aldmerri Dominion is pretty cool. It's not my favorite of the alliances, that is for sure. But let me know what you guys think of all the skills available here. What do you think of the Aldmerri Dominion's racials? And perhaps more importantly, what skills do you think might get added or tweaked with the Khajiit? Because they're kind of lacking currently in terms of what they have available. We're left with 2 passives and their ultimate. They're missing almost half of their available skills there. So let me know what you guys think might be added by Zenimax in the near future. Now guys, if you enjoyed this video in the slightest and would like to see the channel grow at all, please hit that thumbs up and the subscribe button coming up, and make sure to leave a comment down below on anything Elder Scrolls Online, MMO, or gaming related in the slightest. I will do my best to communicate with you guys. I love talking to you guys in the comments and in my inbox and all that good stuff. Thanks so much again for watching, guys. This has been Pulse, bringing you more Elder Scrolls Online goodness, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.